This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin, and with me this week are two very special guests and one regular person who's been on the show before that you already know. This week we are joined by JR.
Hello.
And Alex.
Hello.
From the Opinions May Vary podcast. Thank you so much for being on the show this week. I'm also joined by Nick White.
Hey.
But before we get into the show, I actually want to ask Alex and JR, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and just a little bit about your podcast before we go into it in depth in the second half of the show?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Opinions May Vary, OMV for short. We've been a podcast for just over 8 years now. We started out as we wanted to be like the news podcast. We're essentially going to take all the articles from Bleeding Cool that we can find, and we're going to talk about them.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh too much. We definitely tried to do that in our early days too.
Yeah, you guys get it. But we quickly realized that nobody really cared about our opinions on comics. So we started leaning toward talking with creators and artists, and kind of it also blossomed into just kind of everything. Anything that we thought was neat, that we thought and we wanted more people to know about. You know, our fans, whether it's like, hey, this is a really neat group of women who go to Ren fairs and teach people how to sword fight. And like, or this is a comic book artist who writes who draws one of the really raddest comics on the planet right now. So, you know, like anything that we think more people would benefit from knowing about, or just anyone who says yes to coming on.
We rely heavily on the matter of, we can't do much, so we like to talk to people more talented and more creative than us.
Sure.
And we do that a lot. And yet, like JR said, it's whoever will say yes. But we've never turned it ourselves, but I've had friends who say we're a show for the every nerd, because we'll do comic book content, we'll do video game content, we'll do cosplayers, we'll do artists and steampunk shows. So we cover a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've combed through some of your backlog of episodes, and you guys cover a lot. Like, I thought that sometimes, you know, just comics is a lot. You guys go like 150% beyond that. That's incredible. I don't know how you manage all of it. I have so many questions about just how you stay sane with a show this big, especially for 8 years. Like, that's super impressive. But you know what? Let's actually get into the thing that you mentioned for just a moment. Let's talk about comic books really quick. I'm excited because I need to know, and I have to legally ask, how have you been and how have comic books been? So let me just toss it over to you, JR.
It's been a weird time. For the first time because I got into comics, especially on like a weekly basis, in 2009. So I'm still kind of new compared to a lot of my friends when it comes to comics and comic collecting and reading and all that stuff. But for the first time since I really got into it, you know, there was that 4 or 5 month period where I didn't read anything because pandemic. I couldn't get to my shop. I was, you know, staying away, socially distancing and all that stuff, up until I believe it was July when I've started going back and getting my books. So it was definitely like, as far as like how I've been, you know, it was, for a while, it was kind of sad. It was a bummer. But picking up books again, actually going to my shop, and like, I came home the first time with like, and I don't have a very big pull file. I'm kind of selective in what I read, but coming home with like 20 books was like, hell yeah. I was pretty psyched. It was nice to finally catch up, and it was like visiting old friends. But other than that, you know, it's been pretty good, man. I've been reading a lot lately. As far as like books that I've been reading, are we on that point yet? Is that what?
What have you been reading? Sorry, that's what I should have said instead of how have comics been. That's just a phrase that goes into my head, and I forget that people who aren't on the show every week and don't understand my weird mannerisms, they just So what have you been reading? I guess that's what I should have asked.
Kind of a mix of everything. I used to be like a strict DC guy. It was all about DC comics. I love DC. I have DC characters tattooed into my skin. You know, I love DC, but I've really been gravitating toward a lot of image books lately. I really like the independent stuff. Specifically, I very much enjoy Wonder Woman. That's not even independent. That's DC. But I got stuck on the fact that it's by Daniel Warren Johnson, who did the Yeah, so I've already messed it up, but I really love Wonder Woman Dead Earth, which I guess I kind of like, it feels like an independent book to me in a way.
Yeah,
Maybe
definitely.
that's why I went with it. I'm just going to keep making excuses until one sounds right. But I really enjoyed that book. We had the opportunity to speak with Dana Warren Johnson a couple weeks ago, and he is without a doubt one of the most kind and just humble, down to earth dudes we've ever talked with. That was rad, and I really enjoyed the book because it's a great story, but it's also over the top. I don't know if you've been reading it at all, but it's kind of bonkers. It's almost like, how are they letting him get away with doing this stuff?
Yeah.
Other than that, I've been reading Big Girls by Jason Howard. It's his new Image book, which Jason Howard, really enjoy his work. I had the chance to talk with him a couple years ago near Comic-Con. Just really cool guy. So when I saw that he was coming out with his own book, he's writing it, he's drawing it, he's doing everything on it. I was pretty psyched. The premise is pretty neat. It's just a fun book for me. And then last thing, I've been reading a lot of Spider-Man lately, which hasn't really been my thing. But then when Ryan Ottley was going over to the art, I was like, yeah, I got to jump on this. Ryan Ottley is one of my favorite people in comics. Invincible is one of my favorite books ever. So when Ryan Ottley was hopping over to Spider-Man, I took the jump too, and I've read more Spider-Man in the last 6 months than I've read in my entire life.
Oh, nice!
And I'm having fun with it. It's good stuff.
That's fantastic. I was tempted to get back on the Spider-Man bandwagon when I saw that Otley was going to be drawing that, because Invincible is one of my favorite comics ever as well. And man, to see that book end and then him to jump over to Spider-Man, it's like a dream come true.
Yeah, it was perfect.
I'm not taking full credit for Ryan Otley going over to Spider-Man, but I'm going to take at least partial credit in that I've said for years, dude, Otley has an amazing Spider-Man. He needs to be on Spider-Man at some point. And then when it went over, I was like, yeah, they listened to me. They did. They listened to the show. Marvel was like, yes, this guy is right. We need to put Otley on Spider-Man.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It just fits. It fits so well.
Hey, what about you, Alex? How have you been? How have comic books been? And more specific, what comics have you been reading?
I've been good. It's just been stressful trying to keep up with everything. I've been lucky because nothing changed for me so far throughout the pandemic, knock on wood. But I guess I don't know how many other comic collectors have this issue where they have a normal pull list and they can't read them all. They're too busy. It goes in a box. It goes on their spinner rack or whatever. And I've got at least a year of Wonder Woman backed up and Catwoman and Green Lantern that I just haven't.
Wow.
Yeah, it's it's like, so as Jayare was saying, before we were chatting, and it's like, am I a bad comics nerd? Have I not been doing well keeping up? But so I looked through what I have been getting and what I have managed to read recently. It's not a lot. And but I'm into Grendel. So when Matt Wagner was going to start putting out a new updated, like futuristic Grendel, a different kind of futuristic than what he's been doing, I jumped on that. So Dark Horse was doing some Grendel Devil's Odyssey. I've got up to issue 4, says there's 8 coming out. And you get to watch Grendel Prime, which is like the half cyborg Grendel, go through outer space and try to recolonize the human race on other planets. But he's a very cold and calculating, mean cyborg.
Okay. I want to be completely honest. I don't know anything about Grendel as a character. Could you give us like a quick primer on what this is?
No.
Oh, no.
Okay.
All right, that's it, guys. That's the end of the show. 9 minutes, 20 seconds. We had a good run.
Thanks for listening. So here's the thing. Matt Wagner, he's been able to build a legacy of Grendels. Okay. It started with Hunter Rose. He's like when you see a Grendel holding a rose and like a glass of wine with a tuxedo, that's Hunter Rose. And he's got like this big fork. It's this spear with like 2 blades on the ends. And he was just this vigilante guy who would do what he wants because he's rich. And then that kind of led into his adopted daughter, who he tried to keep away from a monster. So Christine Spar took up the mantle of Grendel, and she was Grendel for a while. And then we're not going to talk about the time where like her like brief boyfriend decided to try and be a Grendel and failed miserably at it.
We all remember that.
So
everyone remembers that. When you keep saying Grendel, it keeps sounding like Gremlins, and I keep imagining the evil gremlin.
He's had like these little demons that there's been a few like iterations where the Grendel has been an infection almost. Mm-hmm. And it gets bigger and gets bigger. So now there's tribes of Grendels that all try to use the Grendel name and history to do what they want. And they're like weird warring biker gangs of Grendels that fight each other. And then eventually there's one like Grendel Khan who unites all of them and tries to rule the world and shit.
What the hell is this comic book?
So now, so this is over a good 30 years of content where where he puts out like a 4-issue miniseries, a 5-issue miniseries. He had a good run with Tim Sale as an artist for I think at least 40, 50 issues.
Okay.
And so Orion Asante, who was the Grendel Khan, made Grendel Prime, which was the cyborg that we guessed. So the two main ones is Hunter Rose, the first one, and Grendel Prime, the last one, who's like the badass looking cyborg. So we follow Grendel Prime a lot just because he's one of the coolest characters, and he has like a laser sword that's not quite. He has to produce energy himself, so it's not as easily used as a lightsaber. And now he's currently traveling through space to find a new planet to populate. And
as we do.
Yeah.
And like his Grendel Khan has died, and the line has been passed on. So his son was Jupiter Asante, and now he was commissioned by Jupiter 3, and it gets real weird. Some of the stuff is pretty depressing and sad because there's a lot of mental illness between the first Grendel and then the daughter. So he explores a lot of different stuff. So he's the writer and the artist, and which is fun watching him like do his own throwbacks and his own history to stuff that he's made. And his son colors the book with him too. So Brennan Wagner also works on it.
Wowzer, that is impressive. So you're still reading Grendel comics, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, I am.
That is awesome. I mean, hey, but to go back to your comment before about being a quote unquote bad comic books fan, I don't, we've got the most stressful thing going on in the world. So you know what, like sometimes picking up a comic book and trying to like analyze it, even reading in general is just hard. I totally get that. So I wouldn't necessarily, feel too bad about it because I get it. Like I've basically only been reading One Piece and because it's like the most comforting junk food in the entire world. So like I totally understand it. If Grendel is your comfort food, that's fine. Just find something to feel good about,
It's like going back to an old friend kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Any other comics you've been reading though? Has it just been Grendel?
Oh no, there's been a few others, and there's ones I'm more likely to read independent miniseries because I figure, it's 4 issues, I can get in and get out.
Right.
Then like realize I'm 40 issues backed up on X23, and how do I make that up?
Right.
And I've been digging Adventureman, which was Matt Fraction and the Dodsons.
Yeah.
And I always dig how Terry Dodson like does expressions. His faces are really fun. He conveys a lot of emotion. And when you can open up a book and see like a layout of this super team and like, oh, right, that's the ghost chick. It's like, there's always a ghost chick, I guess. But like, we get to see this version now. It's a new version. Let's go with it. And like, oh, this dude's a cool brawler type. I dig that. And then in issue 1, that whole team goes away. They disappear.
Yeah.
And the story has to continue on doing something else. And you get to follow a new character. So I guess introducing new characters constantly is a good way to keep you into a book. But I really dig their art. I feel like he's been drawing mopeds for a long time, and it's another excuse for him for the Dodsons to put mopeds in more stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I've been really digging Adventureman. I'm excited to look into where that goes from here.
Very cool. Well, Nick, what about you? How have you been? What kind of comics you've been reading?
For me, it's definitely going to be something that like people on the Discord have heard about recently, which is my whole like, subscriptions. Are you taking advantage of all of the viewing things you've subscribed to and all of the, buffet style, all you can eat kind of arrangements. And so with me, that's kind of been me revisiting my subscription to CU and saying like, am I making the most of this? As everybody says, well, if you read, the equivalent of 1 trade per month, it's basically paying for itself.
That's what I say.
And if you're more like crazy, then you're saying, well, with all the comics I'm buying on Comixology, with that 10 to 15% off, eventually Comixology U is paying for itself, which is also, I mean, you do you, however you get the most out of it. I guess that works. In terms of me and in terms of what I've been reading via CU, I recently found out that pretty much all of the classic Valiant comics are on CU, pretty much without any sort of limitation. So I started reading Exo Man of War, stopped that for a little bit, wanted a little bit of a tonal break from that, and started the original Archer and Armstrong, which debuted all the way back in... Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, this is from the 90s, right? Sorry, that's literally what you were about to say. Sorry.
Yeah. This is a blast from the past, going all the way back to June of 1992, and for better or worse, it has a lot of 90s trappings. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean that it starts with a 0 issue, which is what all the cool kids were doing back then.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this is a backstory. We're learning about these characters. This is how a normal narrative progresses. This is cool. Can't wait for issue number 1. Issue number 1 rolls around and it goes, hey, cool. This is part of the Valiant Unity mega event. It's a 19-issue series. Welcome to issue 3. And I'm like, but the cover says it's Archer and Armstrong number 1. And it's like, yeah, it's also Unity number 3. Have fun. And I'm like, what?
This is why Valiant died in the 90s.
This is why Acclaim was like, I want a piece of this. And it's like, by the way, Archer and Armstrong have been thrown into this other universe with all the Valiant characters. And I mean, at least to their credit, Archer and Armstrong are like, hey, we don't understand why we're here. What's going on? What has happened? Why has our number 1 issue been hijacked? They don't say that part. And it's crazy because you go, okay, this can't happen forever. This can't be a terrible thing. And then I go to grab Archer and Armstrong number 2. And it goes, hey, by the way, this is Unity Part 11. And I'm like, what? And it's like, yeah, so this is a huge event. And so all of these comics are cycling through. And because you were Part 3, you're also Part 11. And that was...
So what I'm hearing is that you're really, really, really excited for X of Swords, because that's literally what they're doing with all of the X-Men titles right now.
It was crazy. It was not it's still bad if this would have happened at like issue 4 or 5 to have a book hijacked for an event, but to have the number 1 issue of a book get hijacked for that summer's mega event is just, it blows my mind. But as I said at the beginning, it's a very 90s move. It's a super 90s move. Beyond that, I would say, it's a great book. It's written by Bob Layton and Jim Shooter, with art by the very fantastic, and for me, still quite underrated, Barry Windsor Smith. People perhaps probably best know him because he drew the Weapon X story arc, which was not Wolverine. It was Marvel Comics Presents, and I know this because I looked it up and not because I know anything about Marvel books. I don't. And basically, if you're looking for a narrative that is basically the team up between an immortal drunk and a homeschooled evangelical kid with perfect muscle memory, if like you've been waiting for this title, like, let me tell you, it already exists. It's interesting because reading this shows that when Fred Van Lente and I think Clayton Henry rebooted this book for Valiant in 2012, they didn't change too much. And I think what's more disturbing, or again, maybe a very 90s element, right, is that the 90s version is actually a heck of a lot darker. Like, Archer's parents are like evangelical televangelist kind of preachers who have been using their position to like kidnap and murder some of their constituents. And Archer walks in on this and they're like, all right, we got to kill our son. That's how this works. And so they leave him in the house and they burn it to the ground. And he survives and goes on this globe-trotting, very Bruce Wayne, I need to go around the world. I mean, quite literally, it's Bruce Wayne in the sense that I need to go travel to faraway lands and have people teach me martial arts. Literally, that happens.
Right.
And then he comes back and teams up with this guy, and there's this conspiracy organization called the Sect. It's a lot of fun. It's very well drawn. The only thing I miss about 90s books is that I don't get my 90s comic ads in them. And that means I don't get my 90s Nintendo ads, which if anyone ever made a coffee table book of like 80s and 90s Nintendo advertisements, I would buy that in a heartbeat.
I'd buy that like right now. Like I would order it this second.
Yeah, it's I mean, we all have that nostalgia of like seeing those ads in like our Ranger Rick, or I don't know what other magazines people read as kids, highlights. I don't know if they did Nintendo. I don't think they were part of that, but we would all see those, and you'd get those like 3 little screenshots from the video game in the corner, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, like this is all I can see before I buy it, probably. So
so like the ad for the Silver Surfer game, where if you took a picture of your high score or like the final victory screen and mailed it to them, you could win a prize.
Yeah, isn't it wild to think back on things like that, like back before like nobody could fake that in like 2 seconds? You know what I mean? Like people would be like, "Hey, that must have genuinely happened." You know, I believe you. And now no one would believe you, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
I will also briefly say I read all of King of Nowhere yesterday. This is from Boom Comics, written by W. Maxwell Prince. He, of course, is of Ice Cream Man fame. Drawn by Tyler Jenkins, colored by Hilary Jenkins. Of course, a lot of people know them from their work on Grass Kings or Peter Panzerfaust, although I don't think Hilary worked on that. But anyway.
Yeah.
Great book. Thoroughly enjoyed this. You just have your average dude. His name is Dennis. He has a real bender of a night. He walks up literally in the middle of the road, or rather in the ditch off to the side of the road, walks into the nearby town. It's called Nowhere. Nothing is what it seems. We have people with like extra heads. We have people whose heads are like fish heads. There's a lot of anthropomorphized creatures going on. What's real? What's not real? If you've read any W. Maxwell Prince, you have a real kind of his narrative styles are very much present in this work as well. I would recommend that book 100%.
Yeah, I'm very excited to read this. It's been on my to read list since the collection came out. I just need to sit down and actually do it. But like, you know, we were saying before, sometimes it's just hard and you sometimes just can't get to everything that you want. But
I have a question for Nick.
Yeah.
Were you at all inspired to search out like an old checklist and try and find and read the other issues of Valiant Unity 1, 2, and 4 through 10?
Right. That is a great question.
What was
that?
Shadow Man and Eternal. What's his name?
Shadow Man, Eternal Warrior,
that guy.
Bloodshot,
Solar Man of the Atom,
et cetera.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I did briefly consider it, but then also part of me was like, you know what? I'm already mad enough that this is happening. Like, I'm not going to give you what you want. Like, I am just going to plow through and I will sit through these 2 issues with 7 issues in between that I will skip. And that will be it. So I don't know if that makes me the worst comic fan or the best comic fan, but I was like, I'm not going to play your game. Like,
it depends. Yeah. It depends on the year, right? It's the era. Yeah. Like in 1994, you were the worst,
right?
But today, I think people respect you for doing that.
God, I hope so.
Really quick. Well, for me, I got my copy of the Short Box Press Kickstarter in the mail. This was a Kickstarter that ran from a UK publisher where they put out these really interesting collections of like 4 or 5 different little independent books of non-standard size comics, and you know, some of them are really short, some of them are graphic novel length. It depends on the box and who's working on each one. And so I got mine in the mail with a couple different books, but the 2 I sat down to read, I'm gonna only just talk about one because I didn't really care for the other. I read Dead End Jobs for Ghosts. This is by Aminder Dhaliwal. And this is basically asking the question, you know, what if someone found a way to harness the power of ghosts, but in a productive way? Because what if it turns out all those automated tasks that you take for granted, like car washing machines, your Roomba, automated cars, maybe, what if they were actually just controlled by ghosts who wanted to help? And those ghosts could, you know, earn money, and then the money that they earn would get sent to their living descendants and family and stuff like that. That's kind of the story. There's some intertwined kind of mixing of like people who have died, kind of understanding like or battling, I guess, with their value in their living life versus their dead life, and trying to do the right thing by working these ghost jobs. And it asks the question, and kind of comments on the idea of how people place value on themselves solely based on the work that they do and their job. And how some jobs are more respectful than others in society, and questioning that whole idea of like really harsh capitalism, I guess. It for a short little book, I mean, honestly, I don't think it was more than like 50 or 60 pages. They managed to cover a lot of like ground with it. So if you're interested, I mean, you can go to shortbox.co.uk and pick this up. But man, this is a really cool little book, and there's like 4 or 5 others to read from this Shortbox press that I got, which I'm very excited about, because I don't know, indie books are really interesting. The other book that I'll talk about really quickly is I read High Level #1. This is by Rob Sheridan, with art by Barnaby Bagenda and inks and colors by Romulo. I'm butchering this. I'm sorry. Romulo Farado Jr. I'm sorry. So the idea of this comic is, what if the world was garbage and everyone was scraping to survive, and it was the future, and you had a chance to ascend to a better life from a lottery, but in doing so, you're never seen again. Yeah, it's kind of not an original concept
now.
Yeah, like it's a book that came out last year, in like, I want to say the early part of the year. It's only a 6-issue series. I think it was meant to be ongoing, and then it ended in September, so I don't think it had the numbers to keep going. And yeah, it's not an original concept. I think you can see some stuff kind of being pulled from Lazarus is the first book I think of, but again, I don't even think Lazarus is original in the idea of people ascending up into higher society and stuff from a lower class. But what drew me to this book was the art. It was beautiful. It reminds me of like Fico Asio from No One Left to Fight, or Benjamin Percy from the Autumnlands Tooth and Claw. Like, it's really beautiful coloring and style, and like there's so much detail in the art from like a painterly perspective. I wouldn't say it's super detailed art, but it is very beautiful art. Yeah,
Did you read his work on Omega Men, Mike?
I'm not sure. I didn't look into what other stuff they've done. But yeah, I read this book, and I don't know if I'm going to keep going. Maybe I'll pick up the rest of the issues in a sale or something like that. But I wasn't super drawn to it. But it was an interesting looking book, and I think that like that deserves a shout out. So that's why I wanted to mention it real quick. But yeah, let's we're running super long because I just love talking about comic books, and I'm glad that you guys do too. But let's jump into comic books that are coming out very soon. New comics are dropping on September 30th, 2020. Let's talk about what we're excited for. I'm going to pitch over to Alex. What are you excited for, either this upcoming week or in future weeks?
So Juggernaut #1 just came out, and
yeah,
I've always been a sucker for bad guys who maybe want to take a turn and try and be better, but can't really get there. And they're always just viewed as always being the guy who smashes and is evil. So after reading #1, like he was on a Thunderbolts, and he had his own like single issue with the other X-villains with the, what was that called? Black, just Juggernaut Black and Mystique Black, I believe, which was last year at least. So I'm excited for more Juggernaut, for some more smashing. Looks like he might take on the Hulk. I don't know how, because I haven't been keeping up on the Hulk. But who knows? Marvel just does whatever they want with all their characters. But
well, if you want to get caught up on the Hulk, I would recommend reading L. Ewing's Immortal Hulk. It's probably the best Hulk book I've ever read in my entire life.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're into like, I mean, maybe you're not into this, but it's an interesting take on Hulk, because it's like body horror meets really interesting storytelling.
Right.
And it's all about the Hulk and going through his history and trying to basically make logical sense of all of it. It's very impressive.
Because I saw like a news panel briefly where it's like, oh yeah, maybe something happened to Hulk again and it's terrible. And She-Hulk is a harpy now? Or red She-Hulk. Betsy Ross is a evil harpy person, and that's we're just going to keep going with that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and it gets covered in Immortal Hulk. So, I mean, if you're interested, that book has got all the answers for you, I think.
Huh. Yeah, so I'm into Juggernaut. I want more Sitter X Stone and smashing and his new armor, and give that to me. That's what I'll take.
Very cool. Very cool. What about you, JR?
There's a couple books that I'm pretty psyched for coming out this week. The second volume of Batman 3 Jokers with Jeff Johns and Jason Fabok. I am a sucker for Jason Fabok's art. Ever since the first time I saw him was on Detective Comics when John Layman was writing it. And I was like, who is this? I need more of him. Put him in my face. And I've been trying to buy pretty much like when he was on Justice League, loved it, which I believe was also with Jeff Johns. I'm also a big fan of Jeff Johns' work. I mean, there's been a lot of stories lately in regard to Jeff Johns and the Justice League movie, which is kind of a bummer, but I'm trying not to draw too many conclusions until everything is kind of done with that. But I enjoy his comics. 3 Jokers, the first volume was fun. It was a fun read, as I guess as fun as a sociopathic murderer can be. But but I really enjoy, mainly it's for Jason's art, just because I'm such a big fan of his, and the teasing and the build up and the hype that there's been around the book was a lot of fun. Like Jason's been posting on his Instagram for what feels like a couple years, like just posting teasers and snippets of, 3 Jokers coming out, blah, blah, blah. Now it's finally happening. So the second issue comes out on Wednesday. I'm pretty psyched for that. And the other one that I had was Chew number 3, John Layman and Dan Boltwood. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyone who listened to the first couple years of our show, I never shut up about Chew ever. It was my favorite book. I loved it. It was like one of the first books that, like, when I first started reading comics, it was like a number 1 and there was a lot of hype around it. And I was like, I want to read this. And it would turn into like my favorite thing. Big fan of that book. Absolutely love it. So when the Chuniverse, if you want to call it that.
All right, that's it. We're done.
Yeah, that's the end of the show. Thank you so much, guys, for being on.
We have a really strict pun rule policy on this show.
Oh, it's
too bad. One strike. It's literally it's one strike.
And that's it. There's zero tolerance. I mean, it makes sense. I don't blame you. I'm pretty mad at myself for it.
Yeah.
I'm
when it was announced that more Chew was going to be happening, I was pretty psyched. Layman has been kind of writing a lot of Chew stuff into his other books, like Outer Darkness had like the Chew crossover.
Best Layman book,
dude, right? Yeah. And then Image just nixes it out of nowhere. Like,
it's Skybound. Oh man, we're going to talk about this in the break. Yeah.
Yeah, I was super bummed because I'm a John Layman fanboy ever since Chew, so I've been reading almost everything he's been putting out. But Outer Darkness, even putting aside the fact that I just read his stuff because I like him, that book was so good. I loved Outer Darkness. But when they were like, yo, Chew's coming back, I was psyched. It's a fun book. I obviously miss Rob Guillory on the art, but Rob's doing his own thing on Farmhand, which again, another amazing book I really enjoy. But I was pretty psyched. So the third issue comes out. It follows Tony Chew's sister, I believe. And it's just more of that universe with the ridiculous powers and the abilities. And it's a fun book. I dig it. And I'm psyched for it. I'm excited.
Yeah. I love this book. I haven't read the second issue yet, but I've read the first one and it's such a blast. Saffron Chew, which I just love the jokes in that book. Man, that book is fantastic. Nick, what are you excited for this upcoming week?
So I've been reading some conflicting reports on whether or not this is coming out this week. So for those who may or may not get mad, this could be wrong. These dates could be a little off. I've seen September, I've seen October, but I'm pretty excited for the collected volume of Quantum and Woody, Earth's Last Choice. This is written by Christopher Hastings, drawn by Ryan Brown, colors by Ruth Redmond, letters by Hassan Otsmane Allahu. Is that right, Mike? I think that's how. I know at one point you had the pronunciation correct. I think.
Yeah. We really try, Hassan. I'm sorry.
So I was actually really fortunate to get early access to some of these issues with advanced copies. So I've read a little bit of this series so far. I'm actually really pretty pumped about this for those who are new to the show, Valiant within the last year and a half really just hasn't been doing it for me. And part of it is just the fact that it seems like they've jettisoned the idea of really embracing a shared universe. I won't fall down that rabbit hole this week. I already did it like 2 weeks ago, so we'll leave that right there. I really was mainly willing to give this book a try just on the premise of Ryan Brown on art. For those who aren't aware, Brown, of course, has worked on everything from Bedlam to Manhattan Projects to Bebop and Rocksteady, Destroy Everything, perhaps probably best known for co-creating Curse Words with Charles Soule over at Image. I really like his work because there's this sort of like crazy energy that permeates all of it, and he doesn't always draw the most beautiful things, but he definitely draws some of the most deranged shit I've ever seen. So I was really willing to try it based on that, but I think what actually surprised me is that the narrative is actually pretty good. I was shocked to see that Christopher Hastings basically took where Elliot Rahal left the characters, I think towards the end of 2018, and actually kind of like took on that narrative canon baggage and kind of built the book on top of that. And I really thought that A, with everything going on with Valiant right now, that Valiant would not be that interested in doing this. And B, just in terms of being Quantum and Woody, most of the time, whenever this book gets a new miniseries or whatever, people are like, Quantum and Woody, they're kind of funny and they make jokes and there's no real need for like a narrative through line. So the fact that he actually kind of picked up on the fact that the two of them are now like wanted criminals because they were deemed not really suitable to like join Unity and were just basically a danger to themselves and everyone else, and then they tried to murder them. Right. Minor spoilers for a miniseries from 2 years ago. I was really shocked to see him pick up on that and tell a really interesting kind of conspiracy theory narrative that really has great cliffhangers and builds from issue to issue. So this was just a real pleasant surprise. And and again, Christopher Hastings, for those who don't know, probably maybe best known for doing Dr. McNinja, but then also if you're a Marvel fan, and again, I've probably read like 7 Marvel books in the last 5 years. But if you're a Marvel fan, then you probably know him from Gwenpool and also a lot of Deadpool work. So, and of course, he did that with editor Heather Antos over at Marvel, and now that she's over at Valiant, it makes sense that he's now working with her again, doing another funny book. So, yeah,
that guy's got a pretty good sense of humor.
If I may,
please do.
He's gonna do it. He's gonna do it. I was debating doing it myself.
We talked to Chris on episode 245 in 2016 because our friend Joe was a huge fan of Dr. McNinja, and he got us into Dr. McNinja, and I bought, I think Dark Horse was putting out like collected volumes of that too.
Right.
And so we had him on with our good friend Joe to chat him up and talk about his work from all Dr. McNinja, but also his Deadpool stuff. And he was a lot of fun. He's really cool.
That's fantastic. Well, enough plugs of your show. Really quick. The book that I'm excited for this week is Department of Truth #1. This is by James Tynion IV with art by Martin Simmons. And the basic premise of this book, I don't really know anything other than like the cover has JFK with like eyes crossed out on it on the cover. But the question that it asks is, what if all conspiracies were true? How does one cope with that? And who's been covering them up all these years? The Department of Truth. And this seems really fucking weird. So I'm going to check it out and see if Tynion can deliver on something that seems to be the most absurd thing in the world. Like the synopsis mentions like, what if flat earth was true and there are lizard people and there are this and there and that. And it's like, okay, man, I don't know how you're going to capture all of the insanity of modern conspiracies in one go, but let's see what happens. So I'm going to check that out this week. I don't know if you guys have seen this book at all, but James Tynion sometimes goes out really far on a limb and sometimes it doesn't break. So I'm really excited to check it out.
It sounds stressful.
Yeah, also that. But yeah, you know what? We're going to actually take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to JR and Alex about their show, as well as more comic stuff and interviewing and all that stuff. So we'll be back in just a minute. show this week, we are talking to Alex and Jayare, who were, in the first half of the show, but we're going to talk to them not just about comics, but also about their podcast. Opinions may vary, OMV, as they said earlier. And really, I just want to know, just to get things started, Alex, Jayare, whoever wants to jump in, how did this podcast come about? You guys said that you've had a bunch of different comic guests, but you've also talked to a lot of other people. It went from one thing to another. What made you sit down and say, we need to record these conversations?
I'll let Jayare take the start.
It's kind of a weird genesis in that back in the day, we started out in 2012. And this is at the height, or not the height, but like the beginnings of the Walking Dead TV show. Mm-hmm. After the Walking Dead TV show was Comic Book Men, which was Kevin Smith's show within his comic book store down in New Jersey with Walt Flanagan and Ming and Brian and Michael. I can't remember. I can't believe I just remembered all their names. I watched the first season and I was like, okay, that's fine, cool. But it wasn't really what else, didn't really grip me. But what I did like was the fact that each episode, at least in the first season that I saw, was like they'd start the show and end the show with like, oh, we're recording a podcast and we're talking about the experiences we had in the comic shop. And I was like,
right.
That looks really easy. You just need a mic and a board and then talk with your friends. And Alex and I met when we worked at a theme park together years and years and years ago. I knew Alex was big into comics. We'd been to conventions together and all that stuff, as well as our friend Justin, who was one of the original founders of the show. Mm-hmm. So I was like, "Yo, you guys like talking about comics? I like talking about comics. I'm new to this. I'm the up and comer. Like, yeah, I read comics. I'm so excited about everything."
You should be. Comics are fucking awesome,
right? They're pretty cool. They can be pretty cool. But started to do some research. Bought some equipment. The first thing that I ever bought off Craigslist was our soundboard, which was like scary. I was like, dude, Alex, you got to be my muscle. I don't want to die. But it turned out just being this really rich guy with two pianos in his living room, who no longer had a use for a soundboard.
Okay, right? Because once you got the second piano, you don't really need a soundboard.
Right, yeah,
That's how that thing goes.
You've outlived the usefulness of the soundboard. But yeah, and we started out just like especially with the name like Opinions May Vary, like, oh, we're gonna be like that show. I think this comic is great. You're stupid for not liking this. Like we're gonna fight, but we're friends, and like we all love comics, and then. That never really even happened. The long running joke on our show is that we almost never disagree. There are a few things that we are very passionate about that we do disagree on, but for the most part, we tend to agree on just about everything. But the show name stuck. It is what it is. But it really is just three guys who wanted to get together and talk about comics, and hopefully our friends would listen to it. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of spiraled from there. Justin eventually ended up leaving the show, so we had to fill the void because Alex and I are just not interested in, alone. But so we filled it with guests and interesting people who do interesting things.
We would try to do like weekly topics and do, okay, what's your favorite weapon in comic books? What's the best death in comic books? What's the best? And we would all, pick something, and that would take up maybe a third of the show. And then we're kind of struggling to fill an hour. But thankfully, as Jared, I believe he was about to get into, we had a host of friends who were willing to help us out and give us their time. And that happened a lot, where we would beg Joe and Brett and Colin for their time, and John and Will would come on too. Anyway, it got to a point where we realized like we need to do some more. And we started looking outside of, just our local friends. We started asking people we might meet at a convention, or we had a lot of cosplayers on for a while because that's who would say yes.
Right.
We only got under 50 episodes to your show, and you can't really go to Jim Lee and be like, hey, do my show. He's not going to answer your email.
Man, I don't know. I've seen podcasts just out of the gate, like 3 episodes in, big, huge name in comics. So I don't know. I think anything's possible.
One of the things we would stick to is getting organizers, or if we can't get the face, we'll get the people who work for them or work with them.
Okay.
So if we can't get Eric Canetti, we get Jason Schachter, who's his art rep. And, and he runs Essential Sequential. If you've been to any convention, the purple banners, it's Jason's the guy. And so we talked to him, and he gets, he's got stories about commissions and people that demand signatures for free, and dealing with so many artists and how many shows he has to book. And now he's telling us about different conventions. And we're like, no, tell me more about Emerald City Comic, stuff like that. And eventually, we'll get to the point where we can have Danny Warren Johnson on, but there was a long road to get there. And it was a lot of, I guess I'll say for every 5 emails, messages, texts, whatever I send out, I'll get maybe 1 response. And that's
I responded. That was crucial.
Yeah, that was the one that week. Yeah,
it's one of those, we're also super interested in how stuff works and how stuff is made. Talking with Jason about being, because it's not something that I ever really thought about. Hey, Essential Sequential is at the show. That's cool. Yeah, but how did they get to the show? How did this group of artists come together to be under this one banner? The logistics and stuff. While we might be shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes because it might not be the most engaging content that the masses are looking for, but we find that stuff fascinating. I don't know if you guys are fans of PAX at all, the Penny Arcade Expo.
Yeah.
I've been a big fan of Penny Arcade for a long time, the webcomic in general, and the guys who make it, Mike and Jerry. And we had one of the guys who works at Penny Arcade, this guy, Jeff Cowles, who it's his job to put on the live, at the time, the live D&D show, Acquisitions Incorporated.
Oh, wow.
And I love Ac Inc. I love that show, but I'm dying to know about it. What goes into putting Acquisitions Incorporated on? How do you get that table even just on the stage? How do you that kind of stuff is fascinating to us. How stuff works, how stuff comes together, because ultimately it's got to happen.
Right.
And we just find that kind of stuff really interesting.
Yeah, you're already giving me thousands of different ideas that I'm just gonna steal from your show and be we're gonna have different folks on and just crib the ideas from you guys. But no, that's what makes an interesting podcast. I think going beyond because at the end of the day, think about it, there are a bunch of different comic book podcasts, just to focus it on comics really quick, but there are a bunch of podcasts out there that are talking to creators, and how did you get started, and what kind of comics do you like to draw, and what blah blah blah. But going beyond and saying, well, let's talk to the rep. Let's talk to the person that organizes the convention, because that's stuff that I don't think a lot of people know. And they all, a lot of comic fans attend conventions, or they're aware of them, they understand what comes out of a convention. But to say, oh, you ran the main stage at New York City Comic Con, what does that mean? That's really interesting stuff. So I'm glad that some podcast out there is doing that, because that's the kind of stuff that I think people who want to get really in depth about organizations and stuff like that, that's the kind of stuff they want to listen to. So I'm glad that you guys you're putting that out there for the world.
Hell yeah, man. Thank you.
We try.
Hey, yeah, I'm again, I like I said, I've combed through episodes, but I haven't listened to everything, so maybe I've got 8 years worth of backlog to go into or something.
I apologize in advance.
No, I totally get that. There are people who have told us that they've listened to every episode of I Read Comic Books, and I'm just
the immediate response is always, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. It's what did you think of those first 40 episodes where we didn't know what the hell we were doing?
Yeah, ditto.
Yeah, but it's also interesting to hear the two of you talk about, sort of this discussion of really just showing people what's under the hood, so to speak, in terms of comics, or how things function or how things operate, because I think our show kind of went through a similar kind of internal debate of we're interested in these things, we find them fascinating, is anyone else going to find this interesting? And eventually we sort of discovered that the answer must be yes, or at least people have been kind enough to lie to our faces, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, we kind of had the same moment of we think this is interesting, or we want to talk about flatters or how people's coloring process varies from one person to the next, and we think that's interesting, but like, does everybody else just want to talk about like splash pages forever or something like this, or what? But
or they just want to talk about the latest Batman villain
exactly
series and, whatever Scott Snyder and Jeff Johns are doing. I'm not trying to shit on Batman, it's just the first thing that
you're
comes
just
to
saying,
my mind.
like, big super popular, like mega headline news, the stuff that gets the clicks, right? So
yeah, I mean, like I think JR said before, it's the we just combed through Bleeding Cool or the comic book subreddit and said, okay, what can we talk about this week? Like there were definitely weeks where Nick and I were sitting there for a half hour, 45 minutes trying to just come up with on the spot relevant, timely topics until we ultimately decided, man, that's not our show. I don't know if you guys had that same realization or what.
Yeah, I'll say we have, and to this day we still do, where it's just the two of us and our friends. Like I'll pitch them an idea and go, what do you guys think of us doing this, and see what their reply is. But there's definitely places where I think we could try and JR might disagree, and I'll just say okay, because I wanted to really get on the side of our artist friends, and they might have their art stolen and now it's being printed on someone's pillow and sold in their Etsy store. And I was like, okay, here's what we do. We invite the thief on our show and we call him out and just ruin their damn day. And Jared's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And I'll be like, okay, we can do something else. So it's a matter. There's a lot of agreeing and disagreeing, but like, sure. We're able to handle each other in a fair manner where it doesn't hurt each other.
Gotcha.
And we're pretty open to agreeing on things.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was going to say in regards to like episode topics, I mean, if it's not necessarily a guest, because you do have episodes where it's just the two of you, is it just like a communal, like you guys come together with a couple of ideas and then you decide on something, or is it one of you has an idea and you just run with it for a certain week? Obviously, we're going to bring this thief on and gotcha question them maybe didn't pass that test, but for the other beyond that, is how do you guys function with that, with episodes where it's just the two of you?
It's kind of how we're feeling. It also highly depends on, like, we call the episodes where it's just the two of us. And I'm sorry, I know I hit my pun limit.
It's my turn. It's my turn. We call it our Justice episodes because it's just us.
Okay, that's one.
Well, it looks like our show is just about to become just us because
there's even a sticker. We recently had a omvpodcast.bigcartel.com, by the way. We got a sticker pack made. Alex worked with a bunch of different artists to put together, like there's obviously like our logo, but there's also some kind of in jokes with the show for longtime listeners and things like that. And one of them was drawn by our friend Seymour, that it's like a justice themed thing. It's like a picture of us shrugging and it says, sorry, it's just us, because there's no one actually interesting on this episode.
Sure.
But it's kind of like if there's no guest this week, sometimes, I mean, there are times where it's just like, hey man, let's just do the two of us because I have something I want. Like usually it's when one of us has something to talk about.
Right.
Alex had one of my favorite episodes, like in our entire history, a couple years ago, where he chronicled donating his kidney to his brother, which obviously has nothing to do with comics, has nothing to do with pretty much anything that we've ever talked about on the show. Mm-hmm. But it was super personal. It was something we've never done before. I thought it was brave as hell. And I also thought it was interesting. I thought it made for good content if I want to be, the selfish content creator. But it was also really neat. And I thought it was different and fun and brave. I already said brave.
Whereas
I mean that's fantastic.
My reasoning was just that we wouldn't have to bother someone over Thanksgiving week. We don't have
to talk about the super personal thing, but also to not inconvenience people. Sure.
Well, this way, like,
in a way, you guys like also sort of set a bar where if you wanted to do like a long personal, topic again, like the bar has already been set at organ donation. So like it kind of worries me that like I don't know what the next step would be for the two of you because it's already pretty up there. So like how do you top
Here's
that?
The first time
I don't know. Okay. I mean
that didn't happen. I have not killed anyone. Anyways, so our podcast is a lot of fun. thank you for listening.
Well, no, I mean that's that it sounds like there's a massive range. Like I know we've kind of touched on it throughout the episode, but it's like you guys get guests from all over the spectrum of nerddom. I mean, like have there been episodes that you're just incredibly proud of that you can think of and go, man, that was such a good episode that we put together? That's if it's a very personal episode or if it's just a comic book guest or some other guest.
I guess it's weird because there's times where I'm willing to just take the chance. And once we're done with the episode, Jayare usually confesses, he's like, oh, I didn't know about that one, but it turned out really good. He was really happy with it. And this happens more often than we have a guest on. We go, well, that was too bad. But I guess we've been really lucky pretty much the entire time of having on people who help give us a good show, and otherwise we're able to pad the episode a bit. Like you were saying earlier, like having to try and do an interview show twice a month and figuring out what to ask them or doing the research to learn about them and see maybe what they don't want to be asked or how to pronounce their name right and all this stuff.
Right.
Where was I going with this? Oh, so we talked to this guy, Livio Raimondelli, who's an artist. He lives on the West Coast. He was back on episode 325. He was answering all of our questions so fast we ran out of questions. And it's the kind of thing where like we were doing our regular bunch and our what we would have, and he's just, there's no really story behind it. It's the simple answer. He's giving a good answer. There's just no thought behind it. He already has it. It's loaded in his chamber and he's firing them. And like I'm just like, whoa, what do I do? And I ended up started asking like Star Trek questions and shit, and just to fill time it's before we could get like something else down. But it's been good. I guess it comes down to our favorite guests, which for me was 206. That was Jayare, help.
Larry
Houston. Larry Houston was the art director for the X-Men cartoon in the 90s, the X-Men animated series.
Whoa.
So he's responsible for how all the characters look, for a lot of how the story went, because he loved comics. He also storyboarded the Spider-Man cartoon before that, like in the 80s, 70s, I believe. Just such a nice guy. So super cool. And I just happened upon his comment on a YouTube post. And I was like, is this really the guy? How do I confirm this is the right guy? And I looked into it and I was like, I want to talk to this guy because he like made my comic book childhood, basically watching this X-Men cartoon. And it was really, he also art directed the intro to the G.I. Joe movie, the cartoon movie. So that whole sequence with like the Cobra ship over the Statue of Liberty, that was all him. That was all Larry. And just like everything he was saying was beautiful. It was gorgeous. That's our favorite episode to date. But we managed to find the right guest and he said yes. I guess I can't really think of anything where we made it good. we rely on our guests to make the show good for us, and we're just lucky to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that. Go ahead.
I was kind of just going to mirror what Alex was saying. There are some episodes like the one where Alex talked about, donating his kidney, where it's just the two of us that have, I feel, left an impact and are some of our best stuff. The Larry Houston episode is without a doubt between the two of us, our favorite episode. We've talked about that at length on our own show. It was just a very fun time. But it does lean heavily a lot on the guest. Like Alex said, there are a lot of times where sometimes I'll be on my way to Alex's and I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm going to say to this person. Like interviewing people can be stressful as hell, especially when you either like when you look up to them, when you have admired their work for a really long time, or you just don't really know them. You don't how they're going to react to questions and stuff. Like sometimes people can be a tough interview. We on our 200th episode, we interviewed Doug Paskevich, who does Arsenic Lullaby.
It's a dark humor comic book, and he also had worked for Mad Magazine in the past, and it's dark humor, and I think it's a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of it.
Gotcha.
He is a notorious, like, he doesn't take shit. He doesn't, like, he will destroy people online who come at him. Like, he has no problem with telling people they're stupid. You know, okay. He's an intimidating force. And
so you thought it was a good idea to bring him on your show.
Let's celebrate our 200th episode with
That's exactly what it was too. We're like, yo, we're at 200. It's time to go big because
right.
Alex turned me on to Arsenic Lullaby. Alex has been following him for a long time. And even when we like first connected and we were like chatting on Skype, like pre-show, we're like, you know, we were joking with him about like, you know, just hope you don't yell at us or anything. And he's like, look, don't ask me any of these stupid questions and I won't yell at you. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to erase every question that I have because I just know that they're all stupid. But
that's intimidating, man. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was rough. Sometimes it can be very, very stressful. But like most of the like 9 times out of 10, we come out of it and it's just like a weight off the shoulders. It ends up being rad. It turns into one of those like, yes, do meet your heroes because they're just amazing people. It's gratifying to know that they're as cool as they seem, like either online or, you know, at a show. Like, oh, they weren't just hamming it up for me at the Comic-Con table because they wanted me to buy their book, you know. But it can be very, very gratifying. Not really sure where I'm going with this anymore, but our guests carry us.
Yeah, I totally understand. I mean, like we've probably done, I don't know, 30 or 40 guest episodes over the past 5 years, just because our show isn't necessarily leaned towards just interviews and things like that. But yeah, like it feels like every time we have someone on the show, it's very intimidating. I'm always a little like stressed or anxious about it, and then we get 5 minutes in and they laugh at a dumb joke that I make and I go, oh, okay, everything's fine. These are just regular people, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, right? It's just, you're just talking to regular folks and they just happen to be incredibly talented, you know, and that's what makes them really interesting. But yeah, I get that. Like as soon as you finish the episode, you go, damn, that was really good. So glad we got that person on the show. So I totally understand that.
Alternatively, it ends and we go, gosh, I don't know about this, or maybe this was the wrong person, or if we're trying something different with the show, we go, well, maybe this wasn't a good idea. And then, of course,
we only have that happen.
Well, look, just hold on. I'm gonna bring this back around, but I don't blame you for thinking I won't. You know, but then we put the episode out and people really love it, or there's, you know, great reception. And I think that's always been kind of one of the fascinating things with our show. And you can tell me if it's true with yours as well. It's just sometimes we honestly just don't know how people are going to receive something until we just put it out. And sometimes we just get totally surprised by the sorts of episodes or topics or guests that people really enjoyed. And we thought, well, you know, maybe we didn't think it was going to kick off, you know, in the same way.
I'm jealous because we don't see a lot of feedback. Like we put the episode out, we watch our downloads, like kind of happen sometimes, and we'll get like a close friend be like, oh, that was a good episode. It's like, thank you, Brett. You listen every week and you're our best friend and you come hang out with us and play D&D with us. But like,
I can't trust your opinion because you're a friend. Like,
well, Mike is a real data nerd, which means that like we've been sending out Google surveys to people for years now.
Yeah.
And that's always been really interesting to see the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, and which kind of goes into something, you know, I'm curious to know how you guys distribute your show, if you like push on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or something like that to try to like get feedback. I don't know how else, what your means for getting feedback is. And we're getting way in the weeds of podcasting stuff. So thank you if you haven't turned the episode off. I'm just curious.
One of Alex and mine, so whatever the proper grammar is, one of our biggest faults is the fact that we are terrible at self-promotion. We're both like,
it's tough.
I don't know if
it's tough. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do.
Right. And like, I don't know if you just chalk it up to like, secondhand embarrassment, or like I just feel bad pushing this stuff on my friends. Like, oh, they have something better to do. You know, if you want to listen to it, you can. But honestly, like, you know, if you're busy, don't worry about it. You know, like,
if you got something else to do that. If you don't have something else to do, find something, then decide whether or not that's worth doing, and then maybe listen to the show. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
The term of shameless self-promotion, and we just look at it and go, yeah, but I got a lot of shame, so...
If you don't have a family reunion going on this weekend, assemble one yourself, and, you know,
Sure.
if you're the only attendee, go ahead and
But
I mean, the only reason I ask is, you know, for a show that's been running for, you know, 8 years, like I look at our show and I say, like, there's always room for growth. We can always get more listeners, even after we've got, you know, 250 plus episodes. Like, someone might discover our show and then become like a diehard fan, and they'll, you know, contribute on Patreon, or they'll join the Discord and talk with us, and they'll come to the Hangouts and all that stuff. Like, for some reason in my mind, there's always like another level of achievement that I can reach, because we're always aiming to be like Comic Book Club Live, or, you know, like any massive, humongous podcast. As much as I don't want that pressure, for some reason I want to achieve that status of like audience. So I'm always trying to like push it, and then I get really tired out, or from just pushing things so hard, and like, and I feel that same level of like, man, I know that I'm pushing this, and all I'm doing is promoting my own thing. But I don't know. The only reason I keep doing it is because, like Nick said, like this, we send out surveys. We try to get as much feedback from people as possible without being like, so what'd you think of every episode?
Right.
We've gotten, like, every once in a while we get a little bit of feedback saying, oh, I saw someone retweet your show, or I saw someone like post it somewhere else, or you retweeted it, or blah blah blah. It was the first time I'd seen it. Like, I've been doing this show for 5 years. I promote like every single episode like 4 times a week or something, and someone will be like, oh, this is the first time I saw it on your feed, and I'm like, how? It's all I tweet about.
Those are always the most interesting moments, is when people come to us and say, I found your show via X, and, like, you know, after a couple of years, like, I think we had pretty much, as I think is true with a lot of shows, we start, you know, you start to map out how most people are finding your show. Like, you have a good idea. And then, you know, this feedback was just getting so interesting because we started having people discovering our shows in ways that we hadn't thought about before. And again, as Mike said, this is like very in the weeds, but it's I don't know. I find this stuff fascinating.
So that's kind of why I had reached out, because you know, always looking for new listeners and wanting people to find your content and enjoy it and whatnot. And I was thinking, like, how much can we pitch our episode to people who don't listen to podcasts? Am I really going to be the one to convince them to start listening? So I figured, let's try and find some friends and make some friends, and then maybe we could try and cross promote. So I found your show, and I was listening to it quite a bit, and I was like, well, if there's a chance that we can talk to people who already listen to podcasts, then maybe they'll listen to more podcasts. And so so that I figure that's a good attempt. And on a likewise end, if OMV hasn't supplied as much comic content as our listeners want, or as they've gotten in past years, they could come to your show and get more comic book stuff than we've been putting out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. I hope that, you know, more people listen to our show. That's always the goal, right? But yeah, I mean, and vice versa, right? I mean, if folks want to know about like behind the scenes production stuff and like things just beyond comic book content, I mean, OMV is probably the place to go to. But yeah, it's wild. I don't know. We're way again in the weeds and down the rabbit hole, I guess. Like, so, you know, you've kept your show going for 8 years. And yeah, I guess the question I have about that is like, what's driving you still? You know, I mean, not to like be blunt or rude about it, but like every 2 weeks you guys are coming back together to keep your show going. What's got you still wanting to talk to each other after 8 years of podcasting?
So for the longest time,
you go ahead.
We did it again. Quarantine recording, where Alex isn't directly in front of my face. For the longest time, there was a lot of pride involved. We started the show weekly, and we were doing it every single week, and we did that for 7 years straight, which is exhausting, but it's also, we could say we did it. Like, we've been putting out this show, like, and like we had a lot of people that we saw, like, I don't want to say competitors, but like people would come up and they'd say, we had this new thing too, check out our shit, and be like, oh, cool, great. And like, they've all kind of subsided. So it's like, oh yeah, we're outlasting them for whatever that means. It doesn't
successful out of spite.
Yeah. And it turned into a pride thing. Like, we've done this every single week for X amount of weeks. And it's just, we can say that we've done it. We've met some of the coolest people. We've had the opportunity, like, that we probably wouldn't have had a chance to meet had we not done the show. Or maybe we could meet them, but we talked to them for 5 minutes at their table at a Comic-Con, and then we have to bail because we're holding up the line. Mm-hmm. So it's afforded us this amazing opportunity to talk with some of the coolest people, and make new friends, such as this show. Like, one thing, even just doing research and looking into this episode, is right off the bat, I was like, okay, they're kind of just like us. Their format's just like us. They talk about similar things. They're just talking about comics, and it was just nice, So this show has afforded us an amazing opportunity to talk with a lot of unique, and just great people.
Also, press passes. That's
there we go.
That's the real answer. Okay. Well, that's really interesting, because like, that's the thing that I think that keeps our show coming together. Is not to make this all about our show as well, but like, it's good to hear that, like, that idea of, like, pride to say we've been doing this for this long is like enough reason to keep coming back and having interesting conversations. And I think that's like almost a testament to the dedication that you guys have to your show, that it's sure maybe out of pride and spite you guys are trying to keep the show going, but at the same time, it's not like you're going to continue to put the show out, but the quality is going to degrade, right? I imagine you're trying to keep your show at the same level of quality, if not better, by, bringing on more interesting guests, plus using that saying, hey, we've been around for 7 years, I can justify the whole let's bring Jim Lee on the show now, kind of thing, like we were talking about before. So that's fantastic. But I did also want to ask about comic conventions, because I'm curious to know what your favorite comic book convention is. But we can continue talking about why you keep making your show too. I'm just all over the place now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, one of the contributing factors to switching over are like you mentioned, putting out good quality content, and that was one of the main reasons why we switched from weekly to biweekly. Or it really not even bi-weekly, it's kind of semi-monthly. We essentially put out 2 episodes a month. Mm-hmm. And it's just doing it on a weekly basis. There were times where we were either struggling to put a guest together, like schedules weren't lining up, we weren't getting many responses, or we just didn't have anything to talk about. So we would end up doing a Justice episode, but it would just be forced. It would just be like, what are we going to talk about? Like, we'd sit there sitting across from each other at our studio for like an hour and a half. Like,
okay,
I guess we could talk about this.
One time we did a Justice episode where I opened up my box from CGC and we looked at my graded comics. Like that we actually.
That's an unboxing episode. It was an unboxing. There's an audience for that.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
But like, rather than force content out just for the sake of putting content out, because we've done this every single week for, at the time it had been 7 years. It just wasn't. I felt like we were tired. It would give Alex an opportunity, which, okay, I'm gonna embarrass my co-host here.
Perfect, because we haven't even talked about variant covers yet, and I haven't brought up the fact that I wanted to embarrass Nick on the episode. So go ahead.
when we first started interviewing people and going down the route that our show is kind of currently on, it was never really like decreed, like, okay, JR is going to handle the kind of logistics and uploading of the episodes and, updating the blog and Twitter and all that. And meanwhile, Alex is going to scout for guests. He's going to contact people. But it just kind of fell that way. And for, I don't know how long we've been interviewing people for, maybe 6 years, 6.5, 7, I don't know. Week in and week out, Alex has been finding not only unique, but interesting, just enjoyable people to talk with. And the like 3 times that I've done it, and where I'm like, hey, I think I found someone to talk to. I'm hitting them up. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting because like it's a lot of like trying to get your language right to come off as like polite and professional, but also interesting so they don't just delete your email right away. Like I cannot give Alex enough credit for the work that he puts into this show that, you know, we're not making any money off of it. We've never made a dime off of like putting out this. Like we do have like the stickers and stuff, but we're so in the red from hosting fees from the previous 7 years, you know, to make up that money is going to take a lot of stickers. But I cannot give Alex enough credit for the work that he puts into this show. And I don't know if I've really expressed that before. So I guess in a public setting where he has no choice but to accept it is the way to go.
On a podcast that is not your own, no less.
Exactly. But yeah, I guess that kind of, and switching over to the biweekly part also gave Alex kind of more breathing room to work with guests, figure out schedules, get everything kind of in line. It's not like, okay, so they said, yes, can you do tomorrow? Maybe. Like
someone who's important and being like, how's tomorrow? Being like,
oh, man.
Oh, that's crazy.
We scheduled this episode out like 3 months in advance. That's...
But yeah, it led to what we believe is an overall like more consistent quality product. Less Justice episodes, less us just filling the gaps, and more interesting people. But anyways, yes, we can. Enough of my rambling. Alex is a really good co-host. I love that man. And the next section, we have to talk about variants. Is that what's happening?
I got.
Well, no, we don't have to. We don't have to.
I want to bother.
I'll embarrass Nick on your podcast when we record later. How about that?
So we talked to Jeff Callis from Penny Arcade, and like I think a few weeks later was PAX East, and Jeff said to come visit him and come say hi because we were promoting the show.
That was the second. The second time.
And so, you know, we meet him in person.
I can't remember.
He's hanging out, like he's doing the pin trading thing, and he's like, "Well, what's your goal? What's your eventual goal with your show?" And we looked at each other and we're like, episodes?
Yeah, I ask myself that every week.
and we honestly didn't know. Like, do we someday want to have our own convention? But now we've gathered, you know, somewhat of an audience and we've made a lot of friends, and I started trying to put together a audio drama that we'd also release on this format. And so I was like, I guess we'll try making a serialized show to include between our you know, our usual episodes, I'll call them. And so there's that thing that kind of is driving us now too.
Very cool. Well, dang, we're just putting out a podcast over here. Holy smokes, you guys are starting to hold like in-universe OMV kind of thing. I love it. Well, I guess I mean, really quick, because we are kind of running out of tape over here. What's your favorite convention? If you could think about like all the conventions you've been to, what's the best convention you've been to? It seems like you guys have been to a handful.
Are we talking like best like iterate like New York Comic Con 2012 or just New York Comic Con in general? Like
either one. If you have like a particular year, even better. But if there's just one that you think is consistently great, that's also good to hear.
My answer, I'll go first because mine is just completely expected. Mine is anyone who's listened to really any episode of our show already knows, and I've already brought it up in this show. I love PAX. I love PAX so much.
Which PAX?
East.
Okay.
We're from the New England area, so Boston is an hour and a half from us.
Okay.
And like I mentioned before, I've been a big fan of Penny Arcade for a long time now. And then, you know, we always heard about PAX out on the West Coast, where it originated, and then they finally started coming out to Boston. We finally started going to that show, and it's one of those things like where you can. And Alex mentioned like the press pass thing earlier, which is cool. Like getting into a show for free to cover it for our podcast is really neat. But right. getting into your favorite show, which is it's a big one. So like they don't just allow anyone and them saying yes. you are worthy of covering our show. We're going to give you a badge that says media. And then people are going to like, it's just really neat. It's gratifying. It makes it seem, like worth it. All the time and effort that you put into making a podcast. It's just
absolutely.
But also I just really love PAX. I love gaming. I love game. Like they have everything there, everything. Mm-hmm. There's tabletop. There's the big, AAA studios putting out the greatest games ever made. And then there's also just the indie stuff where it's like last year at PAX, because PAX East happened literally like 2 weeks before everything shut down this year. I bought a card game based on professional wrestling. Never thought I'd be into that, but here I am throwing money at these people.
Right.
But for me, it is PAX East.
Gotcha. What about you, Alex?
I got to stick to the solid 3-year clip that Boston Comic-Con was at the Seaport World Trade Center. It got out of a small basement. It got an actual hall. It got a big old convention center. And it was our favorite show. They didn't overdo it with celebs. It was an artist-based show. It was a comic books-based show. And then, unfortunately, they were bought out by Fan Expo. And now they're like a celebrity-heavy show. And the table space and the aisle space for comics makers just shrunk and got cramped,
shoved in a corner.
And it's a sad thing that I believe happened to that show. They got bought out, and like the buyers thought they were just buying some convention and are abandoning the fan base that was already built in, that was already just massively contributing. And it was sad to see it go, but and that was like, we were tabling at that show. We would buy a table and sit next to people we don't deserve to be sitting next to.
Right.
Saying like, hey, listen to our podcast. But I'll say that Boston Comic-Con was great, which doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, if the world, somehow heals from everything that's happening, maybe I'll have to make my way up to Boston from New York. So that could be fun. Maybe we'll come see you guys. But yeah, I'm only curious because I've been to, a bunch of comic conventions in specific. I've been to PAX Unplugged, for the last 2 years, however long it's been running. And I've always enjoyed that. PAX Unplugged has blown my mind. But yeah, I think Emerald City is my go-to love of the world, because I went to that convention a couple of years back and it was magical from beginning to end, because it's an artist-focused show for the most part, and it's wonderful. What about you, Nick? I don't know if you have any conventions that you love. Have you been to conventions other than C2E2?
Gosh, I've been to like Grand Rapids Comic-Con, I think once or twice. Not a whole lot else. Obviously, I think we were starting to make a lot of plans to attend a lot of these things.
Yeah, this year was going to be a big year for us.
And those plans kind of had to butt heads with other large-scale world issues. So, yeah.
Well, not to be to end the episode on a downer, but I think that's a good place to wrap up. I do want to. I'm excited to talk to more with you guys. I know we're going to record an episode to be on your feed in a little bit, but thank you so much for joining us on IRCB, because it's just great to talk to other podcasters that are kind of like in the same world. Like you said, JR, like we are very similar kind of podcast styles. So if you like our show, you should definitely go check out OMV. For the episodes I listen to, it's just like this show. It's a lot of fun. So for folks that are interested, where can they find the two of you on the internet? Where can they find your show?
We're pretty much everywhere in terms of like the social media and all that. Our main website is omvpodcast.com. It's the most basic website you'll ever see, but you're able to listen to our episodes there. So please excuse the basicness. Eventually, we will get around to having an actual good website, kind of like yours. But omvpodcast.com is the website. We are on Facebook. That's at Opinions May Vary. And Instagram is Opinions May Vary as well, all one word. YouTube and Twitter is at OMV Podcast as well. If you could follow and subscribe, that would be totally rad. And then on the Spotify and we find our stuff on random streaming services all the time that we haven't uploaded to. But yeah, the main one, Spotify, we just started getting our episodes on there because we decided to join, the 20th century. And merch can be found at omvpodcast.bigcartel.com. We have an enamel pin with our logo, and we have a sticker pack. It's really basic stuff, but it's a lot of fun. So everyone could go like, follow, share, smash that like button. Am I right, fellas?
Do you guys have a MySpace?
I'll put a bunch of links in the show notes. I'm going to just completely ignore what Nick said.
All right. Well, you had a shot. I'm not listening. I mean,
Alex, JR, is there any other places they could find you, I guess, for your own personal stuff, or is it just the show?
Just the show for me. Nothing else I do is that interesting.
Okay, cool. Well, everyone out there, you listen to this episode, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, where I try to post pretty often and retweet some interesting things.
For those of you who don't know, this show and our many subscriber-only episodes are powered by fans like you on Patreon. You can join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show, 5 stars please, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you choose to listen to podcasts.
And you can join us on our Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord, where we do hangouts and book clubs and all sorts of really cool stuff. And if you want to chat with us live day to day, that's the place to find us. And make sure to tell a friend or two about the show. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for our show. We can't thank them enough. Xander is a very cool guy, someone that gives really good high fives when you can see him in person, but he also gives good digital high fives. He also edits the show. I want to say thank you to Nick, and extra special thanks to JR and Alex for being on this episode. It's been a ton of fun. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.